morning everyone. You can see that we're going to be doing an illustrationary project for this morning's art class, and I thought it would be a bit fun doing this super cute pug who's by Charles. It's an adult black pug, royalty free image from Hexels. Fantastic resource for any artist or even if you're teaching. I highly recommend checking out their website and joining up. Now I've printed out the reference image because I find it a lot easier to mark on my reference image some basic structural guidelines that I can then transfer onto my piece of paper. So I've got my hard copy even, I've got a HB pencil, a sharpener and a rubber. I've got a piece of paper to obviously do my artwork on. Now this is about a 220, 240 GSM cartridge paper. Personally I prefer a cartridge paper than a watercolour paper. It's going to get a wet bashing from the ink and the tea. Because it's cartridge paper, it seems to take the water better and flow a little bit more easier. So I've got that. I've got my drawing set up, which I'm going to talk you through in a moment. I've got some tea, just brewing there. I've got some magenta acrylic ink. I've got my water pot. I've got some tissue. I've got a range of brush sizes just to see how things go, so it's always good to have a few options. I've got a little palette for my ink and dilution. I've got a putty rubber as well, and I've got an ink pen. Now you can do this this is a cartridge drawing pen. You can use a fine liner pen if you want to, or you could use a dip pen. They're all going to give you different results, but really nice results at that. It's about good drawing skills. So let's get on with things. Let's first of all come back to the reference image. Now I like to print off my reference images. I find it easier then to draw on some guidelines and get an idea of how I'm going to tackle this image onto my piece of paper. You can see here, first of all, I've put a circle down for his head shape. Then I've looked at dividing the face into half, so that line of symmetry that runs straight down through the nose, through the middle of the mouth. And I found that kind of easy going at that angle, slightly out because of camera lenses and photographs. And then also my eye line, so that I can see that that runs down through the top of my nose, and that my eye points, the tear ducts, sit just below it on the inner parts of the eye, and then on the outer parts is slightly higher, so it gives me a good guide. Then I'll come over to my piece of paper. First of all, I will hold my pencil towards the end at a low angle to my piece of paper, and I'll get a circle down to give me a rough position of where I'm going to have that head sitting on my piece of paper. Then I've put in that guideline, which is running straight through the middle of the face. Okay, I'll also then put in my eye line, as you can see here. Then once I've done that, I started working on the nose. So once I've got that nose down, and there's a little bit less on the left and more nostril on the right, I can then use that. So if I measure my nose to give me a guide of how much face I should have on the left, and then how much nose to how much face I should have on the right. I can go up and down on this diagonal as well, taking that measurement, but that will give you the bare bones. Remember that you always start off keeping everything very simple. So the eyes are plotted in as circles, the nose is just an oval, and then you start bringing your hand down your pencil so that you can get in and do some detail and build it up. Keep your pencil nice and sharp. Once you've done that, then you can take a rubber and you can remove things. So you can see here, because it's a HB pencil, there's a little bit of kind of pencil tone that's come out onto the piece of paper. So I'm going to clean that up, because once I put the ink in, I won't be able to clean up any of my pencil marks. Therefore make sure they're the marks that you want to be able to see, to draw hopefully your black ink on top of. Otherwise they're going to come through and be the bane of your life. Right, so you should end up with something that looks like that if all is going to plan. Now at this stage, we're now looking at introducing some colour, and we've got to be aware of what we're going to do. We've got to have a plan. It's a bit like the A team. So if I look at him, He's got this white section in the eyes, he's got some white highlights over the eyebrows, also around the nose and the mouth area. He's got a few splatters down here. This means that particularly for the eyes, I'm going to try and avoid putting any colour down for the eye area. You could use masking fluid if you wanted to. I'm just going to paint round it. I'm going to put some paint on the nose with my plan to lift it off using a tissue. So you can see here I've got a tissue, it's scrunched up, and then I can dab it off. This is acrylic ink, so it means that if you put ink straight down onto the paper, it's going to stain. The best way of dealing with this ink is to put the ink down into wet areas of paper. That means it'll dilute the pigment and it'll stay flexible for enough time for you to move it around the surface. Now, we've got the tea, and the tea is also going to bleed into it and give us some different tonal areas. I'm particularly aiming for the tea to go into the areas that are dark, so you can see the shadows under the ears. You've got this darker fur in various patches on the face and on the neck, which is where I'm going to aim for it. That means that we're going to need a few different size brushes. As you can see, I have those set up here ready for this. The bigger brush is where I'm going to start off. Then I'm going to move down to the smaller brushes. The pointed brush is going to be particularly good for around the eyes, just to give me a crisp finished detail. I'm going to dilute the pigment down in my palette so that it's already very light. It's easier to make something darker and stronger in colour saturation when it comes to inks than it is to make it lighter. Ultimately you're stuffed if you go too dark. So it's better to over dilute, and that's where I've got my water pot there ready to go. Now, let's grab a little bit of ink. And with the acrylics, a little bit will go a long way. Then I'm going to take my brush with some water. I'm going to dilute it down. When you're working in this type of way, it's also ideal to have your piece of paper flat so that you're not fighting gravity. So consider where you're working and making sure that it's appropriate for the effects that you want. Right, I'm going to take a little bit and try it on my paper. That looks pretty good. I've got my tea, so I'm going to be dipping my brush in my tea as well as my pigment. Okay, make a little bit more because I can see this going quite quickly. Right, but first of all, I'm going to just clean my water and then we're going to use everything. Hang on a moment and I'll be right back. I'm going to take some clean water. I'm going to have my reference image so I can see it. And already see it's going to get a bit messy. And then I'm going to go a little bit beyond the border. Okay. And I'm going to work the head. Generally. Now I've got that, I'm going to grab a little bit of pink and feed that in. And because it's wet, it means I can add it in and it's going to be nice and easy to manipulate. I'm also going to have some fun with this pink and bring it beyond boundaries. Okay, I need to grab a little bit of water, just wet this down here. Grab a little bit of pink. Grab a little bit more water. And I'm going to grab a little bit of tea. And I'm going to bring the tea into some areas. Just like so. I reckon that'll look quite nice. Now tea is a great colour to mix with ink. It'll pretty much go with any colour and it'll look really nice. I'm going to add a little bit more pink in. And I'm going to flick it out a bit. give you a little bit of lively fun using that big brush. If you want, you can take the brush and create some splats, just like this. Okay, now I want it a little bit softer just over there, so I'm going to take my tissue and take off the excess pink and tea, just around the nose, and add a little bit more pink just down here underneath the ear. I fancy a little bit more pink over there, like that. And I'm going to take off a little bit down the ear, and I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to take a little bit of tea and create some tea splats too. Now immediately I can see I've got a little bit on that eye, so we can take that off quickly, and that works quite well. Now at this stage, which is quite a soft, gentle stage, if you want, you can grab a fine brush, probably go for a pointed brush, take a little bit more stronger pigment and bleed in a controlled manner a few areas of sharp colour that's a little bit more accurate. It is going to still bleed, so keep that in mind. And really, less is more with this, so do be careful. Now I can see my paper is bowing a little bit and I'm getting that cluster of colour, so I'm going to use a tissue to take off any pooling of ink colour that I don't want, just as you can see there. Now at this stage you really are looking at using a hairdryer or giving yourself a tea and cookie break and then coming back for the next stage. So I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so it's still a little bit wet, but I just fancy topping up a little bit more of a darker pink tone in a few places. I'm going to grab, again, a smaller brush and just, first of all, you know how we said about laying down a little bit of water, putting any ink on, and then I'm going to brush in a little bit of soft pink. So I'm going to work it up, following that eyebrow, because you can see that darker tone just comes into here. It's a little bit more of a softer pink. I'm going to grab a little bit of tea for the softer tone. Try and keep your brush strokes loose, think of flicking. If you want to, use a little bit of water just to bleed out the tone into the colour that you can see. A bit more. You can always add in a few more splats and know that it can be a lot of fun and really make a picture look quite fun and lively. Wash your brush if you fancy more the thinner one. Just do a few little dots. A little bit more controlled with a smaller head pointed brush. Right, now I'm going to leave that to dry. So we've done one layer. This is the second layer of splatting and building up a little bit more tone. I'm going to allow this to dry and then I'm going to be doing the pen detail work. Time to wash up and have another break, or give it a quick dry out with a hairdryer. Right, so now that the picture is fundamentally dry, you've got to decide on how you're going to build up the detail and which type of ink pen you're going to be using. Now with this, the most common pens that you find on the market these days are usually these fine liner pens. They're quite popular, they're nice. They contain a permanent ink, therefore if it gets wet or if it goes onto a wet surface, it doesn't bleed. It's alright, it's quite quick, it's handy, you can carry it around with you out and about drawing. You can do some nice work with fur because it comes in different size nibs, so you can get those little flecks of lines, which is nice. But it's harder if you want to get a graduation of a dark tone into the colour. So it swings and roundabouts ultimately. The other type of common pen you'll find on the market is more a calligraphy pen. Or a cartridge pen. Cartridge pen is what they're notoriously known for. You can see you get the cartridges, you load up your pen, and a lot of the time with the ink in these cartridges you'll find that they're water based. If you draw it on, you get a wet brush or a water brush, you'll find that the ink will bleed and you can dilute it and play around with various different effects. Personally I prefer this one because it gives me a few more options with my design work. But it's, you know, up to you. The other old-fashioned route, if you quite like the old dip pen, so you'd get some ink, you get your dip pen, and with these they come with all different size nibs, so you can take the nibs in and out, and this has got quite a small nib on it at the moment. You literally pull and push in. Yeah, I have to squeeze that. You dip it in your pot of ink, and then you draw it on. The main problem you can get with this is it slightly dots. Famous for spidering on the old school books, but you can see there £1.50, quite cheap. Will give you the option of putting a line down if you're using a water-based ink, getting a wet brush and bleeding it. The other pens that have become quite popular lately, especially in the calligraphy world, are these glass pens, which are beautiful. Again, it depends on the ink that you dip it in, but it sucks up a lot of ink, so you should be able to get quite a long line out of it. That's the idea. Every time you have to dip back in, it kind of time consuming, which you'll find out if you ever use a dip pen. These are nice. It depends on the type of ink you're using. If you're using a water-based ink, then you will be able to get the bleeds. If you don't and you want to go for something a little bit more permanent, like an acrylic ink, then it will give you more of a crisp line. So it's up to you. I'm going to show you using my cartridge pen because I prefer the cartridge pen. And it gives me a few more options. Okay, now the cartridge pen is really good because I can get a fine line with it, but I can also blend out colours and put it in darker patches, which is quite nice with this effect. For example, you can see here where you've got that darker point, I could draw a line over the nose. My ink is probably running out of my pen here. Hang on, bear with me. Then I can get a brush with a pot of some clean water and I can just build up a little bit of a darker tone using that line and gradually diluting the ink out with some water. Now it won't look like much at this stage, but you'll find that as you build up the detail on top of the slightly darker tone, the more realistic it'll look. So it depends on if you want to go more realistic or more abstract. Right, as you can see here, I've got my dip pen because my cartridge pen's run out of ink and I don't have any spare. I've poured out a little bit of ink, I've added a little bit of water and I'm just dipping the pen into the end to do a drawing. Okay, and you can see the type of marks. Now with this, because I'm using that ink which is water based, I can always take a brush with a little bit of water and I can blend it out to give myself a darker tone. You'll probably find my brush is a little bit big for what I was doing. You need a smaller brush to do that, but you can get something just like this. If I just work this up now for a little while to show you, and be careful not to overload your dip pen, that's when you get dotting. And don't draw your dip pen into a wet surface or it'll bleed as well. So, for instance, see around here. Hopefully everyone's got something that resembles a pug. If you've got a potato, obviously you've got problems and you need to work on this a bit more. It's a fun, light-hearted little project that you can play around with. You can see even now I can kind of pull in a little bit more ink, build up some stronger tone wherever I see it. Be careful not to fiddle too much though, because you can lose something magical by having that natural, organic feeling of the drawing. See you all next week. Have fun!